I just had one as someone went out that, she just congratulated me for making every employer of migrant workers look like an ogre. Maybe someone else shares her view.
I actually do share her view. I am a former employer in the program. But I don't disagree with what you've said here today. I think you've brought up some very true comments and exposed some needs. However, I agree that it's human nature. There are some excellent employers out there, and there are some terrible employers. And I met both during my years as an employer. And I think, you kind of you expressed the need for legislation, which I disagree with. At the same time, I think there's a tremendous need for education. And you can say for the general public and for everybody else, but for employers. Because many of these employers, as I saw, jumped into this program because they're running a business, they need somebody to do the work, they're struggling, and so here's an option, great, we'll do it. They've had no cross-cultural experience, they have no language experience, many of them have poor managerial skills with people, particularly with another culture. So it's not that they essentially set out to, I'm going to take advantage of these workers, it's just they do not have the skills and the experience. So I think there's a tremendous need for frankly, I think every employer should have to take a course before they can be an employer in one of those programs to make them aware of all aspects of it. Understanding other cultures, understanding other languages. I think that's a huge need and it should be a requirement. I coached hockey for 15 years, and every second or third year you have to take a course on harassment, on this and on that. And yet here's an employer running large businesses, and they've had no training to do that.
Well, thanks so much for your comments and putting forth that your own experience. I think that what I tried to do in the talk was talk about how these programs enable labor regimes, because you do see such a spectrum of employment practices. So you have the employers that I said that give their employees a vehicle and make sure that someone has a driver's license, and take them to get signed up for their provincial health insurance, for example, who give them separate rooms and computers and Skype. But then on the other end, you have terrible exploitation. But part of the reason that this range exists, I agree, is human nature. But as part of it, what I've tried to argue in the talk is programs that provide the scope for that to occur. And I think that one of the other points that you made that I think is really important is thinking about, really creatively how to improve compliance. Because certainly farmers that who have good employment practices are really concerned about how the growers with bad employment practices are really affecting their livelihoods. So thank you very much for your comments. Eduardo.
Just to connect to that comment, I work for the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario Workers, and we run satellite clinics for migrant workers around occupational health. And we have a program that we extend to employers to go on to be invited. We can't really, we're not enforcements, we can't arrive at the farm, we have to be invited, but to have us go and do run workshops in Spanish or in English or in Thai around occupational health. And it's tricky because I think we did cold calls and mail outs and all around southwestern Ontario, and I think right now we're working with 10 farms. We've gotten hang-ups and things like that. So I think it's great. I echo your comments about potentially it having to be mandatory because just from their own interest, we find that a lot of employers don't want to work with us, and we're not, when I wear it, I'm very neutral in my politics when I work, so we definitely don't engage with them in any way that that makes them think that we're trying to unionize or anything like that. It's just offering, and our services are completely free actually. And the funny thing too is that the employers that we do work with, who are on the spectrum of the better conditions, who are doing things that would seem like good employer-employee relations, when we ask them whether we can put them on our website, we can name their farms as best practices, they always say no. And there's seems to be a culture in a lot of the farming community that we engage with that even the ones that are doing it right don't want to stand up and talk about doing it right, because then they initiate kind of reverberations amongst employers that are doing it wrong, and they don't want to have their neighbors or their, because these are such small communities, right, where people know each other. And so that's a huge barrier that we're encountering, is that there's no advocates. And like Kerry said, then there's also structural things to the program that even at the best employer-employee relationships, there's still very inherently problems within these programs as well. So it's kind of twofold. But
And this is Eduardo Huesca, an MA student in sociology, as well as working for OCAP.
Kerry, thanks for your time. I think this is so important, and just giving us an excellent presentation. It seems to me that a lot of the rationale for this kind of practice and for this kind of program to be implemented is economic in nature, right? It sort of seems like this is the underlying assumption and principle here. And I'm wondering if you can talk about where that economic pressure is touching down in the global food chain. Like, are farmers being squeezed? Are workers being squeezed? Is it pressure from consumers for ever lower food prices? Like, where is this pressure coming from that legitimizes this kind of program?
Yeah, and a really excellent question, because, you know, when I give a presentation, you know, I am not trying to do what that young woman accused me of demonizing producers, because there are, you know, these are food chains in which power is distributed at different levels. And so I talked a lot about, you know, the relationship of power between workers and that employer named on their work permit. But, you know, of course, the big players are the supermarkets. And you know, the supermarkets who control a lot of how our food system looks like. And so these are global players that control a lot of the food market in Canada that are setting the rules and setting the prices. There is a lot of price competition in Canada, much more so than in other countries, for sure. But the supermarkets are, you know, some of the, you know, they're leading the direction of where the food system is going. There's a number of other things, you know, I'm sort of simplifying it quite a bit now. But you also see, I mean, if you look at how horticulture in Canada has just changed. And you know, there have been, you know, when I talk about the globalization, you know, it's also neoliberal policy change in the Canadian food system. And, you know, of course, the trend towards, you know, to survive, you have to be big, and you have to make these heavy capital investments in your farm. So we've seen the number of farms shrink. We've seen, you know, smaller farms having to get a niche in order to survive. And you know, a lot of, you know, people are also under a lot of pressures because of the capital investments that they've made. But the global, you know, how producers have done in Canada is, you know, a mixed picture, because Canadian horticulture has really benefited, you know, if you look at the figures, you know, has really benefited under globalization. So some commodities have suffered and other commodities have expanded. You know, you go into Leamington, and, you know, these greenhouses, I mean, I would like to see aerial shots from, you know, 20 years ago to 10 years ago to 5 years ago to even 3 years ago. I mean, they can't get them up fast enough. So there are people that are benefiting from the way our foods, you know, how things have changed in Canada, but there have also been losers. Did you want to add anything to that? No? Okay. Or anyone else?
Just the other driver at the farm level, of course, is just getting them to show up. And so, yeah, you could say, well, it's economics, because if you were paying $15 an hour, people would show up, but maybe they wouldn't. It's very difficult work, and some of the seasonal aspects of horticulture mean that holiday Mondays, sometimes you need 14-hour days just because of the weather, so impacts like that. It's difficult to find people willing to do that. There are people willing, but it's difficult to find consistent people willing to do that,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Oh, sorry.
Just to speak to what you said, we farm as well. We have 100 acre market garden, we have 1,500 acres, as well as we have dairy and beef production. And for a market garden, that's the hardest thing that we have to find is consistent workers. We can't find Canadian people that want to do it, right? And that's the thing, we need someone who's going to show up every day and predictable. 76 hours work week, I think I put in more than that just milking cows. Cows calve at 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning. We still got to go there to deliver the calf. We can't just, oh well, we're not going to go there and the calf dies because that investment we put in to breed the cow, to carry the pregnancy for 9 months, and then have a calf. We need a live calf on the ground at the end of the day, right? To perpetuate that business moving forward. So you work schedules around it. But we hire 7 people. And these 7 migrant workers have been on our farm for the last 15 years. The same ones keep coming back because we give them a good place to live. We take them to social events. We're close to the city so that they can go do what they want. We give them days off. To speak with what you had said, there is a movement with ag more than ever, which is Farm Credit Canada has put it out. And farmers are very humble and we don't have time. Nothing against that. But we're very busy running businesses that we don't have time to go that way. But they do want us to become more aggregates and go out and talk about those things. But realize that our time is worth something too in running the business. There is money moving forward through the Growing Forward 2 project put out by the federal government as well as the Ontario government. And we can capitalize on some of those as farmers as investments for having migrant workers. We might be expanding to about 12 to 15, but we can't send them to the neighbors because the contract says I can't send them to the neighbors, right? Even though we usually have enough work, but if we say someone else tries something else, we could send them there. But we do give our workers tools, and we do put farm tours together for them to see different things. We do a lot of our stuff with radio frequency tags, so they have a little thing that they just slide into the row for like tomatoes or whatever. So we can monitor from our computer which rows have been picked and which rows haven't been picked. And we can do all from our computer. I can tell you exactly where all the trucks are. I can tell you where all the people are throughout the business because we might need an issue. But there's lots of technology out there, and the technology that we're coming is actually taking away jobs from migrant workers. So if we got 3 robots, we don't need workers to milk cows anymore. The robots will do it.
One of the, when you were speaking, and also one of the, disappearing species of diversified farms in Canada. But as you were speaking, it reminded me of one of the most eloquent, arguments that a migrant worker said against the closed work permits, because he said, if we had open work permits, the employers that have good labor practices would have people queuing out the door. They would not have issues, and the employers with poor labor practices and accommodations would have to pull up their socks in order to retain their workforce.
The other thing, we only see with one country, right? We either have Mexicans or we have Jamaicans. And we don't take both because they fight. And they fight because they're fighting for the same money and the same work. So then we won't get anything done, right? So we only hire one or the other. And there's a reason for that.
I see a number of questions away, so we'll just get a number of hands going up. Yes?
I just wanted to ask really fascinating, and I know a little bit about it, but learned a lot more by listening to you today, and look forward to talking more about it. Is just the role of agents or brokers in it, right? So I know like with Jamaican workers, they don't enter into an immediate contract with the farmer, right? There's somebody brokering, or there's an intermediary in that relationship. And what do we know about that? That like who becomes one? How does somebody become an agent? Who's monitoring?